It's not what you're doing that's haunting them. It's not some display of great achievement or the thunder of retribution. It's the fact that you've become impossible without even trying. You're not seeking attention. You're not shouting your value into rooms that once attempted to muzzle you, and yet they sense you in their minds, in their fears, during those silent moments when they cannot fathom why the one they attempted to shatter is the one haunting their minds. You did not come back with destruction. You came back with presence. There is something inexplicably strong in a human who has traversed fire and emerges colder, calmer, and more composed than ever before. This is what you are now, not because you intend to be this kind of symbol of strength, but because you didn't have any other option. Life forced you to evolve, and you didn't fight it. You let the betrayal, the silence, the loneliness, and the loss mold you into the person they never thought you would be. They had expected your silence to be a sign of weakness. They had assumed your retreat was a sign of surrender. But from that silence, you rewrote yourself quietly, intentionally, not to prove them incorrect, but to prove yourself correct. And now the quiet strength you bring into every room is louder than anything you could possibly say. They don't know what to do with this version of you, the version that doesn't explain, that doesn't chase, that doesn't defend, the version that simply is, and that alone is power, pure, clean, unnerving power. You became a mirror, and whenever they look at you, even from afar, even on the internet, even just by mere whispers in the air, they're compelled to look into themselves because now your growth reminds them of everything they attempted to hold back in you. What bothers them isn't that you're winning, it's that you're doing it without acknowledging them. It's that you're living without broadcasting it to prove a point, and in a world obsessed with noise, your peace screams at them. They built scenarios in hopes of watching you come apart. They attempted to provoke reactions. They goaded your emotions, knowing just which buttons to press, and you gave them nothing. No tantrums, no meltdowns, no chaos, only silence. And that silence, it seared through their illusions better than any boom ever would. You didn't take the bait, you left the battlefield, and that greater than any reasoning you could have posited became your most powerful tool. Now they sit bewildered, trying to figure out why it didn't work, why you didn't break, why you're emerging silently, while they're still mired in the same games, the same cycles, the same narratives they've written to explain your absence. They labeled you weak, emotional, unstable, and now you're grounded, centered, and elevated, and all those adjectives ring in their ears as lies. The fact is, they never thought you would survive, and much less overcome. They never pictured that releasing would be your emancipation, that letting go would be your curing. You turned into the very thing they cannot comprehend, unfazed, and not because you were arrogant, but because you were clear, because once you knew the truth, you did not have to tell it. You did not have to argue it. You simply lived it. And that clarity, it's turned into a storm they never saw coming. You're not attempting to establish anything. You're not making them acknowledge you. You're simply being. And somehow that, in itself, your plain, stable presence, is sending them crazy. There's something creepy about quiet, particularly in a world where everyone is always performing. When you cease to explain yourself, when you cease to defend your right to be, that's when things changed. People don't know how to read stillness anymore. They don't know what to do with someone who doesn't plead for comprehension, who doesn't huddle for approval, who just is. That's what you've become. Someone deeply entrenched in who they are, not because the world sanctioned you, but exactly because it didn't. And there's a certain risk in that. You used to be so easily rattled. You wanted peace, so you endured chaos. You didn't want to lose people, so you lost pieces of yourself. But now, you're still, and that stillness does not signify numbness. It signifies that you have finally come back to your center, the real you, the you that does not need to speak in a loud voice to be heard, the you that does not need to be seen to understand your own worth. The silence in you is not passive. It's strong, it's disciplined, it's purposeful, and it scares them. Because when an individual can no longer be swayed by manipulation, they become uncontrollable. When an individual no longer responds, they cannot be controlled like a puppet. That's the quiet strength you've built up. You're not stone-hearted. You do feel everything. You just don't react to everything. You've decided where your energy is going now, and that decision has built barriers so solid. Most don't even think about trespassing there anymore. And for those who do, nothing to push back against. No defense, no excuse, just cool certainty. There's nothing more psychologically dangerous to individuals who live in chaos than someone who's emotionally stable. That's why they're shaken now. Not because you're hurting them, but because you've ceased to dance for them. You've ceased to shrink for their sake. You're no longer on call for their games. They miss you, not just physically, but energetically. They see that they can no longer reach the version of you who would have done anything to make things work that weren't your fault. The version of you who would have overstretched, over-justified, over-apologized just to keep things in place. That one is no longer there. And in its stead, there is someone quiet, observant, whole. A mirror that states, I'm still here, but I don't need you anymore. I'm still standing, but I'm not running after you. I still feel, but I am no longer moved by your approval. That mirror confronts them with themselves, their decisions, their insecurities, their guilt. You're not the same individual who attempted to break, and that confuses them because, in their mind, if they couldn't control you, you were supposed to break down, you were supposed to unravel, you were supposed to vanish. But instead, you did the opposite. You became silent, you became sharper and clearer, and worst of all, you became stronger. Now, every time they hear your name or feel your presence, there's a tightness in their chest that cannot be explained, a discomfort that cannot be put to location because deep within, they know they lost access to something rare, something pure. And they didn't lose it, they drove it away, and now that it's lost to them, they see at last what it actually was. They don't discuss it, but they sense it in the silence, in the way their confidence falters when your name is mentioned, in the way they relive memories they swore had no significance. You didn't wake up one morning and become composed. This composition of you, the quiet one, the steadfast one, the one who no longer flinches, was tempered, not in comfort, not in acclaim, but in pain. You were molded in silence, squeezed in solitude, and shaped by agony that no one witnessed. They think this strength comes easily. They observe your serenity and deem it as natural, but what they do not realize is what it took to arrive here. What they fail to notice are the nights where the silence was deafening and threatened to break your spirit. The days where your only companion was confusion, betrayal, and the ringing of questions that had no response. You weren't always this way. There was a time when your heart was loud, when it stretched out to people who only took, when your love was full of second chances, when you attempted to mend what wasn't yours to mend. But with time, every call that went unreturned, every insincere apology, every calculated twist of your truth, it shattered something in you, not your spirit, but your illusions, and that was the start of your becoming. There's something savage about discovering that the individuals you had fought for were the individuals who were poisoning you, that the individuals you had defended were the ones who had secretly betrayed you. But rather than hardening into resentment, you did something much stronger. You endured. You sat with the hurt. You let it crash over you. You didn't get out from under it by distracting yourself or retaliating. You let it do what it came to do, wake you up, and it did. Each betrayal was a chisel to the old you. Every lie was fire in the furnace. Every abandonment propelled you further into your own soul, where you had no choice but to confront yourself, raw and honest and alone. And that's where the real change started, because what popped out wasn't a hurt, angry soul who wanted revenge. What popped out was someone who finally came to understand the game for what it was. Someone who no longer had anything to prove. Someone who wasn't addicted to being misunderstood, but was finally comfortable in being unavailable. Your departure wasn't a withdrawal, it was returning to yourself, to your own values, to your own boundaries. And the more you ceased explaining, the more distinct things were. People don't realize that silence can be a weapon, not a weapon of violence, but of lucidity. When you fell quiet, They thought you were weak, but you weren't quiet because you didn't have anything to say. You were quiet because you knew it wasn't worth saying anymore. They didn't listen to you before, they wouldn't listen to you now, and so you let go. You gave up trying to be noticed by the very eyes that had refused to regard you with dignity. You gave up giving out your energy like a commodity to individuals who could only spend it wastefully, and they sensed that change not only in their minds but in their bodies, in the clench of the jaw when your name is mentioned, in the nervousness in their belly when someone speaks positively about you. Because deep within them, they know what they have done. Perhaps they will never admit it. Perhaps they will hide it behind denial, but the guilt is there. It resides in the places you once occupied and now won't go back to. They miss your energy as a chill wind, not because you cursed them, but because you stepped away from them, and that's the fire they weren't prepared for. The one that doesn't destroy, but purifies. You're not a victim of what they did to you. You're a product of what you endured. And when they glance at you now, more peaceful, more lucid, more centered, they are reminded that they contributed to the very strength they were no longer able to reach. You didn't require revenge. You didn't require validation. You merely required the truth. And when you had it, you became unassailable. You've become something they weren't expecting. A mirror, not an everyday mirror, but one that doesn't flatter, doesn't warp, doesn't soften what it shows. A clear, hard reflection of all that they've kept within themselves. And the thing is, it was never your words that left them feeling uncomfortable. It's what your current presence exposes about them. You are a reminder of what they attempted to repress, manipulate, or downsize. When they look at you now standing tall in your peace, unruffled in your quiet, radiant without their permission, they're compelled to face the truth they prayed would never make its way back from the dead, that you didn't merely get through what they did to you, you got through it. You're no longer attempting to persuade anyone of who you are, and that change itself is a charge they can't endure sitting alongside. Your mere presence without struggle or conflict has become a condemnation. Not because you point fingers, not because you're out there sharing your side of the story, but because you're still standing and you're no longer molded by their opinion. And in that quiet, solid strength, you've shattered every lie they attempted to construct around you. The more you elevated, the more their projections cracked. And now, whether they admit it or not, they're unsettled, not by your success, but by your detachment. People like them rely on control, on knowing they can get inside your head, push a button, twist a narrative, and watch you unravel. But you've taken all that away. You no longer respond. You no longer explain yourself. You no longer engage in arguments in which your worth is on the line, and that makes you volatile, and that frightens the insecure. Because to them, power is not something you hold silently. It's something you exercise loudly. But your power doesn't shout, doesn't insist on being heard. It just is, and it emanates in ways they can't replicate. Not with status, not with noise, not with superficial shows of dominance. Now that they glance at you, they notice all that they fabricated you weren't poised, centered, emotionally aware, unshakable. And to make matters worse, you're not even attempting to impress anyone. You're not acting. You're not pursuing. You've let go of the desire to be understood by the people who constructed whole stories just to get you wrong. And in the process, you became invincible. Not in the physical sense, not in the financial sense, but in the spiritual sense, emotional sense, energetic sense. You've taken away their line to the version of you that accepted to be questioned, doubted, and judged. You've closed the door, not out of vengeance, but out of necessity. And now there is no place for their ego to run. They can't blame you anymore, because you've given them nothing to work with. No reaction, no response, no rebuttal, just silence, stillness, distance. And that silence is deafening. It makes them listen to themselves, perhaps for the first time, to sit with the lies they've spoken, the power struggles they employed, the veiled insults and backhanded compliments they tried to pass off as light-hearted. You became the opposite of what they never thought you'd be. A walking contradiction to all their assumptions about you. And now they are left with one chilling realization. The issue was never you. It was always their inability to deal with someone real. You don't need to utter a word for them to realize the burden of what they've lost. They sense it when your name comes up in spaces they now steer clear of. They sense it in how others talk of your strength, your growth, your clarity. They sense it when they scroll silently and come across your energy now thriving without their footprint. And perhaps the worst of it all is that you knew you never had to destroy them in order to get ahead. You simply stopped shrinking for them, stopped proving yourself to the people who were dedicated to not getting you. That subtle erasure, that's what dismantled the image they constructed. Not because you attacked back, but because you took away their ability to define you by their projection. And now they sit with a version of you in their head. They can't manage, can't define, can't shut up, and it's killing them. You became the echo they attempted to evade, the reality they attempted to conceal. And however far they flee, they can't run far enough away from what you've become. Not because you're pursuing them, but because they know what they've done. And you, dear, you're just existing now, fully, freely, and without apology. They waited for it to crumble. They anticipated it. In fact, they required it. They convinced themselves that after they let you go, after they drove you far enough, you would disintegrate, that you would crawl back to them, yearning for notice, begging for resolution, struggling to show them you were worthy. They believed you weren't able to live without them, that you relied on the complete disruption they caused in your life. And for an instant, perhaps even you thought so. Perhaps there was a time when you thought you couldn't breathe without their approval, couldn't see clearly without their sanction. But that moment passed, and something else took its place, something they never envisioned. You didn't crumble, you didn't disintegrate, you didn't do the collapse they had practiced in their head. You didn't descend into self-destruction, even when they tried everything they could to drive you there. Rather, you calmed down, quieted down, concentrated. You turned inwards, away from the noise, away from the projection, away from the illusion they had created. You quit trying to get them to understand your worth. You quit trying to repair the irreparable. You quit bleeding for a person who didn't even care if you were hurt. And in that holy withdrawal, you found something considerably more potent than approval. You found yourself. There is an unspoken anger in individuals when their manipulation isn't effective anymore, when the authority they believed they had suddenly vanishes, replaced with your detachment, not bitterness, not revenge, but detachment, a serene, clean break from their pathology, and that's precisely what you offered them. No yelling, no breakdowns, merely distance, mere absence, mere space so broad they could no longer reach you. Regardless of how much they attempted to pull you back in, with guilt, with phony concern, with manipulated facts, you never bit, you just released. And that not revenge, not retaliation was the act of power they did not anticipate. They believed they destroyed you, but what they really did was destroy the fantasy that you had constructed around them. They took away the fantasy that they ever had your best interest at heart, and in doing so, they bestowed upon you a gift, the unadulterated truth, itchy-inducing, yes, shattering perhaps, but true. And with that reality, you ceased living in potential, you ceased living in denial, you began living in reality, and that reality was cruel initially, but in time, it became the basis of your rebirth. You developed, not despite the agony, but because of it. They were observing too, observing at a distance, wondering why you weren't pursuing them, wondering why their departure didn't kill you, wondering why you appear to be better off without them than you ever were with them. Because this is the part they never got. You were not weak, you were faithful, you were not needy, you were invested, you were not shattered, you were shattering free. And after the cord was severed, after the spell broke, you were something much more menacing to them than a bitter ex or a sad memory. You were untouchable. Your healing brought out their brokenness. Your growth made their stagnation hard to avoid. And despite how they might try to deny it, they've sensed the change. It's in the way that their gaze drops when your name is said. It's in the strained silence that ensues. When someone speaks of what you're up to now, how contented you appear, how changed you are, that change isn't superficial, it's profound. It's etched from each of those nights without sleep, each of the unasked questions, each of those quiet agonies that you transmuted into understanding. They didn't see that transformation because they weren't meant to. It wasn't meant for them, it was for you, and perhaps they'll never understand how much strength it took to keep quiet, to not lash back, to not reveal them, to not reveal your story. But you know, and knowing is enough. You have that knowing in your body now, how you walk, how you talk, how you don't need anyone to sanction your path. You earned every pound of your peace, and no one can take that away from you. So no, you didn't break. You constructed quietly, intentionally, day by day. You sewed yourself back together, without pomp, and what you are now is no longer someone they can play with, push aside, or ignore. You're no longer trying to prove anything to anyone, and that's what's made you so different now. Not boisterous, not boastful, just consistent, like a mountain that will never change, no matter how hard the wind blows. What you've become isn't because of revenge or because you wanted attention. It's the subtle result of consistently choosing yourself over and over again when nobody else did, when it hurt, when you weren't sure if it ever made a difference. The strength that individuals sense from you today, it was not constructed on applause, it was constructed in private, in quiet, in discipline, in profound emotional honesty. You are not the same individual who accepted crap in the title of love, who remained quiet to maintain harmony, who gave space to individuals who could not give it to you. You've grown not because someone finally acknowledged your value, but because you saw that your value was never something to be negotiated. You no longer give it away like it's some present. People get to determine what it's worth. That adjustment shifted everything. It shifted the way you show up. It shifted the way you live. And now people sense it the moment you enter a room, even if they don't recognize it. This is not pride. This is protection. You learned the hard way that not everybody deserves access to you. You quit trying to be all things to all people. You released the need to be understood by those who never actually saw you in the first place. And that release wasn't easy. It meant mourning people who were still breathing. It meant releasing patterns which once felt home. It meant leaving behind the version of you that knew nothing but how to make it through, and entering into the version of you that was ready to live at last. Your silence now speaks louder than words. It establishes the tone before you even open your mouth. It says where you are without shouting, and the ones who used to play with your empathy like it was a weakness, who manipulated your kindness, they don't know how to reach you anymore, because you're not in that place anymore. You've evolved, not above them but beyond their reach, because you're not engaging in their cycles, their chaos, their drama. You're not emotionally available for confusion. You're not mentally present for manipulation. And the honesty of that boundary speaks louder than any argument ever could. What shakes them now is not your departure alone, it's your triumph. The fact that you're thriving in their absence, that you're not merely existing, but thriving, that you didn't require their apology to leave, that you didn't require revenge to mend. You needed space, time, truth, and once you had those, you became something they can't replicate. That's what makes you threatening to their ego. You were once available, vulnerable, open, and now you're not, but you didn't become impenetrable overnight. This new version of you took time, sacrifice, discipline, heartbreak. It took you to go through everything that scared you to death, to be alone, to be misunderstood, to be rejected, and to walk through it and not flinch. You had to find peace in solitude, strength in silence, and identity without someone else's validation, and you did. That's why you're grounded now. That's why you no longer respond to chaos with chaos. You're not fighting to win arguments. You're not defending yourself to people who are determined to misunderstand you. You're just living on purpose, with peace and with power. You've become the person they told you that you'd never be without them. That's what unsettles them the most, because it means the story they created about you, that you were lost, weak, broken, was never true, and now they can't edit it. They have to live with the fact that you were always strong, you just didn't know it yet. But now that you do, there's no going back. And yet, you're not doing any of this for them. You're not living to be noticed. You're not succeeding to be heard. You're not healing to show a sign. You're simply being who you were meant to be. And that in itself is enough. The quieter you became, the louder everything else was, not outside of you, inside them. With your silence, they discovered their own voices, resounding back in the ways they could no longer avoid. And the irony, they had once believed that without them, you would fall apart. They actually thought that they were the center of your strength, the source of your value, the heartbeat keeping your identity alive. But now they sit in this odd sort of confusion, looking at a version of you that they didn't think existed, whole, grounded, radiant, and they can't comprehend it. Because in their narrative, you were meant to dwindle away, but you didn't dwindle away, you rose. And the more you raised, the more difficult for them to keep it up. Not the lies they told people, but the lies they told themselves. The lies that labeled you as weak, as broken, as too emotional. The lies that allowed them to sleep soundly, after behaving in ways they never owned up to. Silence isn't always peace, and now without your voice, the din in their own mind becomes unendurable, because they know, deep down inside, even if nobody ever says it out loud, they know what they did, what they let happen, what they distorted, what they destroyed, and maybe the most chilling reality of all is that they didn't merely lose you, they lost connection with the version of themselves they were while you were still around. Because when someone true, someone genuine, someone faithful vanishes, it leaves a scar, not a mark, an empty space, a hollowness they can't fill. They might attempt to replace you, match your frequency in someone else. But you've altered now, and that alteration wasn't wrapped in applause or wrapped in a lovely healing curve. It arrived in quiet periods of shattering and restoration, of screaming into pillows, of distant walks in which you challenged all things. It arrived through disappointment, through loneliness, through barren nights that ultimately resulted in full mornings. It came in the understanding that your peace was never something to be negotiated, that your value was never to be established to those who gain by questioning it. You became immovable, not because life ceased to hurt, but because you ceased to let that pain build a definition of you. And now, they don't know how to come to you, because the door is still there, only locked, not out of malice, but because you grew out of the spaces they attempted to contain you in. You're no longer reachable in the same manner, not because you're resentful, but because you've shifted frequencies. You're not bitter, you're simply past it now, and they sense it in the pause before they contact, in the times they desire to talk, but realize there is nothing further to say, in that abrupt awareness of perhaps they had been wrong, not once, but in all the attempts they had made to define you. Because the truth is, they're not going crazy for what you're doing, they're going crazy for what you didn't do. You didn't respond, you didn't fight for them to listen, you didn't remain where you were disrespected, you didn't pursue closure, you didn't break down, you just walked away. And that type of departure, it stays with you, it resonates, it haunts. You understand, some storms come with thunder and lightning, some come with silence, and that is what you've become. Not a show, not an explosion, but a quiet act of nature they never learn to anticipate, a reckoning they can't escape, a reminder of what occurs when someone who has given everything learns to give nothing but space. And now you're still climbing, still shining, still unfazed, still constructing, and the quietness you left behind, it's saying all it had to say,